First of all, thank you very much for both of your talks. It's very, very interesting highlights on these issues. The question I'll start with, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this. Let's be radical for a second. If you could completely redesign from scratch the way the education system would look like in maybe a minute or so, how, I know that's a challenge, how would this look like?
So for me, I guess, I believe both in individualization and socialization. So I'm not a kind of a home educator who thinks it's sufficient to educate children on their own. They need to learn social skills. And principally, that very first stage, probably up to the age of about 6 or 7, the focus of schooling would be about socialization. Then I think a phase, probably 6 to about 14, is about a framework of conceptual knowledge. So schooling that is geared around that so that you can then have some context within which to develop your other knowledge and stream all the other knowledge that's coming through on the palm of through the palm of your hand, through your phone, etc., through the rest of your life. And a basis, a foundation that you can scaffold your learning from. 14 to 19, I think then is much more about project-based learning. It's much more individualized. It's much more around what really turns you on and about making stuff, making knowledge, making product, making value, contribution to other people. And then I would say, given that we're going to have a 60 to 70-year working life, the presumption is you probably would go into work at that point, not to university. And just take a little bit of time, because you've got loads of it, to just explore the real world and explore what you're interested in. Because it doesn't make any sense anymore to front load, especially with the amount of debt in most countries you incur in going to university, to use up all of that money right in your early 20s. I would say just explore a little for 2 or 3 years, and then you'll know much more strongly what you really want to explore with further education, which may be vocational or academic, and then take that time to do a bit of that. But you then need to have a relationship with the university that you'll keep going back to through your working life as these oases of calm and learning and reflection and thought, such as MIT.
Well, my own perspective actually on the earlier side is a little bit guided by my goddaughter, so the daughter of one of my best friends. We did our PhD together. As you could guess, I have bought every educational toy possible for her, and they're actually hard to get. There's not, it's not like they're sort of common routine. And yet, you know, she, as kind of a joke with our friends, I bought her some books when she was very young, for example, and she was quite upset that she couldn't just swipe to pass the page the way you do in the iPad, because she's on the iPad all the time. And I just think that the amount of time that these kids spend on their iPhones, on their iPads, that we need to be able to do more, because there's kind of the time that they're in school, but the amount of time proportionally that they're spending on these phones and iPads, we need to develop more content. We need to just use that time to better educate them, and you know, the way that they're able to pick up on all this is...
I think there's truth in that, but I also think there's a danger in that as parents, we think we've got to cram all of their time with learning. And like everybody else, they need a bit of downtime. They need love and hugs. They need to do chores. I think it's really important that kids do chores, so that they learn that in order for things to happen, there's a bit of pain, and you've got to do stuff. And some self-direction too. You have to learn to take some responsibility.
And to discover what it is you're excited about.
So
I guess
both.
to build on that question, I find, I mean, there's of course this question of what the role of technology should be in education. That seems to be a all-encompassing question. Behind this, I find there's a very interesting dilemma in the role of focus. And it's balanced with curiosity, right? The time you are sort of idle with technology is the time you discover new things. The convergence technologies you talked about require that sort of curiosity. How do you, and at the same time, we see that technology can have a very negative impact on our ability to focus deeply in one chosen topic. How do we balance this focus and curiosity in education with or without technology, actually?
Do you want to start with that? There's a friend of mine who works for Pearson, a very large education company, but who used to work for Tony Blair, called Michael Barber, and he said the road to educational hell is paved with false dichotomies. And that's basically saying you need balance. So we shouldn't all be looking at screens all the time, especially if they've got notifications turned on and we're being interrupted all the time. We should be spending some time with focus and reading and immersing ourselves in sort of deep stuff, and some time just reflecting and enjoying the natural environment too, so that our brains have a chance to refresh and catch up. And sleep, also really important. So it's finding that balance in amongst all of the excitement of the new stuff that's coming along. It's just to say, well, some of the old stuff is good too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think balance, as much as I talk about technology and the importance of molecular biology and having this cross-disciplinary training, equally important is the socialization, right? That they be able to be good neighbors, cubicle neighbors, and that they be able to get along with each other, and that requires things that are not necessarily technical in nature. They're playing sports. They're learning to do group activities and things like this, and that's certainly equally important for labs like mine.
Yeah, Alia's talk was about the future of work being about being human, and I agree that in an age where we should be more worried about competing against robots than China and India, it's about humanity that's most important. So educating for humanity, for empathy, for those human skills, I think is absolutely key. So the socialization is crucial.
Yeah, I agree.
To build maybe beyond education and talk about educational institutions, the Broad Institute is located right next to what was the mythical Building 20 at MIT, where people like Noam Chomsky, Bose, I think the first video game was invented there.
Radar Lab.
It seemed to be designed in a way to provoke, right, these encounters.
Yeah.
How do you think of space, as, for instance, at the Broad Institute?
There was a lot of thought on space, on physics. So the Broad Institute is, I think it's probably maybe the only collaboration between Harvard and MIT. And so we're a standalone institute built on Human Genome Project. The idea that we had was that if we could bring labs from Harvard that were studying cancer and infectious disease, and we could also bring the technology people studying proteins and computer science, we could put them all under one roof, that the interactions would be you would be able to foster all these interactions. But our director, for example, we spent a lot of time thinking they just don't happen. You have to catalyze them. You have to actually push them. So simple things like we designed the space actually so that some of the corridors are not straight. They're actually curved, so that as you're walking, you can't just be sort of looking at your phone and walking straight. You actually have to, and then you'll bump into people and things like this. Use of glass walls, but there's many things that we had to do ourselves to force that interaction. Even though we managed to break all the institutional work to bring intellectual property and all that, you still have to catalyze this, and social functions and projects to get people to work together and things like that.
When you redesign schools, if you bother to ask pupils what's important about school space, what do you think they come up with? They say corridors, dining spaces, and toilets are the most important things. They don't want to be bullied in the toilet, so they've got to feel safe in school. They've got to be able to move around easily and have natural light and some of those things. And then those social spaces are absolutely crucial to them. You can kind of learn anywhere. We're hardwired to learn, but the social bits are really important.
Which is probably how we're going to be able to, I guess, learn as a team to compete with the robots. Probably one of the questions that we'll have, but we wanted to, before we wrap up, open up the stage to questions. And do we have any microphones for the audience? Anyone who wanted to share maybe a question? I've got
they were very shy
quite a few left, but this is your chance to take part in the conversation,
right
please. Do you want to stand up and ask? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Continuous learning throughout life sounds fantastic, but how can we marry that with the gig economy and 0 hours contracts and stuff like that?
I think the two fit pretty well, actually. I mean, I'm not a fan of 0 hours contracts, so we need to do something about giving people security in work. And I would love a labour movement that worries about modern issues of the workforce rather than the ones of the last century. I speak as a Labour politician. But I think the notion that you've got the flexibility of doing bits of work here and bits of work there then allows you also to do bits of learning here and bits of learning there. And we will need to be self-reflective enough of where we are in our life journey to say, I've got a choice now as to whether or not I really work hard to maximize earning so that I can save for this mythical pension, or whether or not I do socialization and I don't bother to save in this phase of my life, or whether I build intangible asset through education and go back and do some of that, maybe part-time, maybe full-time. We need to be learning those skills so that we can sustain ourselves through a much longer working time.
And build this human capital you were mentioning. Other questions maybe, or did you want to say a few words? Anyone else? Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question about how you can integrate the sort of philosophy that you're speaking about in the existing educational systems. As a recovering politician, you should know that moving the Ministry of Education is not exactly an easy task.
You're right. And my country is going backwards, not forwards. So I hear this very harshly. I think we start to move it, personally, I think through engaging with parents and teachers. I'm linked with a high school teacher in Palo Alto called Esther Wojcicki, who happens to have a daughter who's the CEO of YouTube and is very well connected. She helped develop the Google tools for educators herself. And Esther's campaigning around Moonshot Mondays or 20% project-based learning time. And say to teachers, let's just put 20% aside for that. Or there's a teacher, Charles, in Maryland, who through IDEO, the design thinking company, and their Teachers Guild has got this idea around what he calls subs hack, which is when you've got a substitute teacher coming in, instead of getting them to trot out in a boring way the bits of work that have been set by the teacher who couldn't make it that day, why don't the subs do project-based learning? Because we know project-based learning is exciting for young people, but we're still working out how to teach it well and how to integrate it into the curriculum. But we can at least make a start and release parents from that battle every morning of how to get their kids out from under the duvet and go to school, because there is at least something exciting that they're looking forward to.
Okay, I think our time should be up, but this is such a fascinating panel. I'm going to open up for one last question. I'm breaking the rules here, so take your chance. Anyone? Okay, no question. I have one question, what you just touched on.
Was there one just there?
Was that a question?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Wonderful, thank you. Last one.
Hi. You were talking about Wi-Fi in refugee camps. I want to know what's the real impact when it comes to online courses in sort of the democratization of education, like given that only 50% of people who enroll in these courses are graduates. So how do they really impact?
It's a really good question. You may know from edX's particular point of view, but generally the MOOCs have not democratized education, the massive open online courses that by and large the vast majority of people who take those courses are graduates themselves. There are some exceptions. In London there is a MOOC provider called FutureLearn, which was established by the Open University, which is traditionally a university that's educating people from a huge range of backgrounds and have been doing so over distance since the 1960s. And FutureLearn have been quite successful through a model that ends up with certification as a paid thing at the end of it. And they're experimenting, I think, quite successfully around that. Their chief executive, Simon Nelson, I think is doing a fabulous job. But we need to do more to push exactly that question, because it's a great opportunity, but we've not achieved the behavioral change off the back of it. Innovation without execution is really
I think
important.
that's right. I think, from my perspective, it's really once you're on board, once you're in a learning mode throughout your career, these things are great. You can access all these things, but you're used to learning. It's how to get people first engaged into that. I think that's really the gap. But from my view, I mean, we're working actually very hard to produce molecular biology courses and things like that, so that we can sort of spread this. But it's people that already have the sort of background. We need to bridge that gap to get them into that pipeline.
Which comes back to exactly your point, which is how do we create motivation to actually encourage students to bridge that gap themselves? So how do we excite and inspire people? I think this is what this conference is all about. So thank you very much for this panel. Thank you very much. And